We're most of us familiar with the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible, but how much do we really understand about their relationship? And what can they teach us about love? Wall Street Journal contributor Bruce Feiler, author of the first love story, Adam, Eve, and Us, says a lot, and it begins with conflict. Bruce, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You know, you say in your piece that we all think that we understand the story of Adam and Eve, but there is a lot of room for interpretation, isn't there?
Well, I think that Adam and Eve basically are victims of the greatest character assassination ever. I mean, it's Adam and Eve, but frankly, it's mostly Eve. They have been dumped on for thousands of years. So here's the backstory to my article that appears on the front cover of the weekend review section of the Wall Street Journal this weekend, which is sort of begins this book that's coming out in about 10 days, The First Love Story. So to me, it begins at my table. I have a working wife. I have adolescent identical daughters, and we talk about what everybody talks about around our breakfast table, which is the changing way, the kind of confusion about how men and women relate to each other. You've got marriage declining, divorce increasing, you've got sexuality fluid, much more fluid. You've got women flooding into the workplace. You have men much more involved in parenting, and we're all just confused. And we live in this hyper-connected age, and yet we have a crisis of connection. And yet I can't help wondering, as somebody who spent a lot of time in the ancient world, of whether there is anything that we can learn from the past, frankly.
Well,
and so a few years ago, we were, on our way we were in Rome, and I took my daughters to the Sistine Chapel, and they looked at that image of Adam and Eve on the ceiling, and I thought, this is the story. We got to look at this story. And as absurd as it sounds, can they help us today?
Well,
Sorry,
I was very relieved to hear that there are various ways of interpreting the genesis of Eve, right? We've for so long kind of were taught that she was sort of an afterthought for God.
Yep.
Here was man and then Eve from his rib. But there are other ways of understanding her genesis, correct?
Exactly. So the key thing to recognize here is there's not one story about Adam and Eve in the Bible. There's two. The second story, which is her being formed from the body and the fruit, and they're getting kicked out of Eden, that's the more famous one. But the first one is really important, because in that one, in Genesis 1, God creates this ungendered person, divides them into male and female. What's true for the man is true for the woman. They are entirely equal. And even when you get into the second story, this idea of the rib, turns out it's not the rib. Eve is created from Adam's selah, it means side. They're standing side by side. She's not his helpmeet. They help each other.
I like
and so
that.
What happened is, yeah, exactly. And so it's incredibly contemporary. You've got love, you've got desire, you've got disappointment, you've got forgiveness, all the things that we all struggle with. The problem is that organized religion got a hold of the story,
but
and
wait,
basically
Bruce,
that means men.
Of course. And then Eve is reformed as the evil temptress with the apple.
Oh my gosh! And even the idea of the fruit, by the way, it's not an apple; it's just a fruit. And the apples are not native to the ancient Near East. It's more likely a fig. We know there are figs in the garden because they cover themselves with fig leaves. That's an act of autonomy. That's what we all know, which is that she doesn't want to be sublimated to Adam. I mean, who among us in a relationship where we all wrestle with, who's going to do this with the kids, who's better with the kitchen, who makes more money? I mean, they are struggling with this balance between independence and interdependence, and that's what's so key to the story and makes it so relatable. So see the fruit not as an act of disobedience, but as an act of autonomy and independence, because once she gets it, she realizes she wants Adam, and then Adam eats it too. They choose each other, and then they get out of Eden. They forgive, they have children. That doesn't work. Cain murders Abel. They forgive again and have Seth, and he populates the human line. The point of this that I'm trying to make here is that the story has a give and a take, a wrestling, a back and a forth, and it can teach us so much. Fundamentally, I think it teaches us that a relationship is about storytelling, right? It's co-narration. Love is a story we tell with another person, and they're the first, right? That's why they're not Adam and Eve, it's Adam and Eve. They're the only one of the biblical figures. Like theirs is really the first joint byline, and that's one of their lessons for us, I think.
And that conflict is an essential part of love. It's not in opposition.
Conflict is an essential part of life. Mending conflict is an essential part of love. Like love is a series of ruptures and then mendings. And that is something that we all we all know instinctually, but we all forget. We kind of define love as the tingles, the romantic, the courtship, the Hollywood party at the beginning, and then we're disappointed when it goes away. But that's not what love is. Rilke said that love is we want it to be bliss and happiness, but it's work. And by the way, what's more blissful than work? Because when you do learn to forgive, you learn to mend ruptures, you learn to come back together at breaks. We know that can be stronger. That's what love is. It is this long-term journey that has ups and downs, backs and forths, but that we can continue to put it back together. And I think the most important thing, and really sort of the idea in my book, The First Love Story, that begins tomorrow in the journal, is that at this moment when society seems to be ripped apart, when relationships are changing, we need our earliest relationship to be one of success, not failure. We need these role models, because if they fail, it almost gives us permission to fail. And when you realize that they got over their conflict, they mended their wounds, then that reminds us that we can do the same.
I mean, one of the greatest tragedies ever befell them. One child murdered the other child, and that didn't tear them apart as it would so many people.
And in fact, the research, I talked to the woman, Shirley Murphy, and I quote her in this piece about we think that that's the worst thing that can happen to a couple, but the truth is couples can get over it. How do they do it? They learn to tell a new story. They learn to add a new chapter to their shared narrative.
I love that image of creating the joint narrative, and that's what love is. Thank you so much for all of that.
My pleasure. Thank you to the Journal, and I'm pleased to kick off this journey of The First Love Story in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday.
Thank you so much.